This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
What impact do you want to have on the world? At General Dynamics Information Technology, GDIT, we put technology to work on some of the most complex government, defense, health, and intelligence missions. Grow your career beyond your imagination with meaningful work that matters at an award-winning top workplace. If you are driven by a vision of a better and more secure future, join us and apply now at gdit.com/careers.
The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election.
This was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Hi, and welcome to Amicus, the podcast that has been waiting to say the words Donald Trump, convicted felon, since it could walk. I'm Dahlia Lithwick. I cover the law and the rule of law and the courts for Slate, and for a very, very long time on this beat, it has looked as though those instruments were just not ever going to be up to the task of creating accountability, outrunning illiberalism, constructing an agreed upon set of facts. And yet, on Thursday afternoon in a New York City courtroom, a jury of his peers convicted former President Donald J. Trump on all 34 counts of falsifying business records in order to conceal a scheme to interfere with the 2016 election. 11 of those counts related to invoices, 12 related to ledger entries, 11 related to checks. It took this jury a little under 12 hours over 2 days. Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. His sentencing is going to take place on July 11th, and I am, as you might be able to tell from my voice, I confess, quite numb in every single way. But here, with the courtside reality check, is Slate's wonderful jurisprudence editor, chief law of Trump correspondent, Jeremy Stahl, who has been in that courtroom in Lower Manhattan day after day after day to cover this case, both for the ages and for all of us and for Slate. Jeremy, welcome home.
It's good to be here, Dahlia, I have to say.
I know this has been a complicated case. That was the knock on it from the get-go. It involves this sort of set of nesting dolls that has to do with documents and then larger crimes, and then what are the larger crimes, and the jury questions that came back in the last day. Details about David Pecker and about Michael Cohen seem to suggest that even the jury was struggling with the same issue the rest of us couldn't resolve in our own heads, which is, what were the crimes alleged? What did the state prove? How did they prove them? Can you just, again, I know you've done this on the show multiple times, walk us through the state's very exhaustive case and a very long closing argument that happened, and just help us understand what this jury was persuaded to find?
So I think you're very right to focus in on those jury notes that were handed back on Wednesday. And the key points of those notes, as you say, are the testimony they were looking to have read back, which was David Pecker's testimony almost exclusively. But also they wanted the jury instructions read back because, as you said, it was this series of nesting doll crimes that were very complicated for, I think, anyone. Even there were a couple of lawyers on that jury, and I think it was probably even complicated for them. They did not have this jury instruction in front of them. And ultimately, what was explained to them, I think pretty clearly, even though it is complex and convoluted, is that in order to enhance this misdemeanor act of falsifying these business records, these false checks, these false ledger entries, these false invoices that Trump basically used to reimburse Michael Cohen for paying off Stormy Daniels, which he falsely described as a legal retainer. In order to elevate that crime from a misdemeanor to a felony, they had to prove basically that it was done in the furtherance of committing or concealing another crime. Now that's Nesting Doll 1. Nesting Doll 2 decides what that crime is. That crime is, according to prosecutors and according to this jury, a violation of New York election law. Nesting Doll 3, in order to prove a violation of New York election law, they had to prove that there was a conspiracy, that David Pecker, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump conspired together to illegally and unlawfully influence that election through unlawful means. So Nesting Doll 3 is the unlawful means. It's what they had to prove. And the jurors had kind of a grab bag of these three possibilities. It could either be the further false documents that Michael Cohen created when he set up this shell company to pay off Stormy Daniels, or a violation of federal election law, FICA, the Campaign Finance Act, that would classify Michael Cohen's payoff to Stormy Daniels as an illegal campaign contribution. And third, tax issues that Michael Cohen falsely, basically cheated on his taxes here. So it was complicated, but I think it was comprehensible. And I think that the fact that they asked also to hear David Pecker's testimony was incredibly important, because it showed that the most credible witness, in some ways the star witness, the first witness that the prosecution put on, was foremost in jurors' minds when they were deliberating. They saw what the prosecutors were arguing, which was this was a conspiracy hatched in August 2015 between Michael Cohen, the head of National Enquirer David Pecker, and Donald Trump. And that's what they ultimately found.
Jeremy, I think probably most of the listeners right now just want to know nuts and bolts stuff, like what happens next, and is Trump going to appeal, and is the basis for appeal the venue, and is he going to jail? And can you just walk us through what we know and we don't know about what comes next?
So the most important upcoming date is July 11th. So in about 6 weeks, we're going to return to the courtroom, and Judge Juan Merchan is going to sentence Donald Trump. Now, the maximum penalty for each of these 34 counts is 4 years in prison. It's very unlikely that he's going to get 4 years even concurrently, because if there was to be prison time, it would run concurrently. That also seems unlikely just because of the logistics of imprisoning a former president and imprisoning the Secret Service. I don't think that means Donald Trump is going to go off the hook scot-free. There are very severe elements of probation and potential home confinement that Trump could also be facing. And while that is going to happen on July 11th, while that sentence is going to come down, you're right that the appeals process is going to take a long time, at least probably a year. And in that time, Donald Trump will probably not be serving his sentence. So Judge Juan Merchan has a lot of options on how to enforce that probation, a lot of options. And given Trump's abusive behavior in terms of attacking the judge's daughter, in terms of attacking witnesses, in terms of attacking the jury, repeatedly violating a gag order, perhaps Judge Juan Merchan will think very long and hard before he decides whether or not to let Trump, continue to walk among us. So that's the key next step, sentencing, the key next step. And then there is that lengthy appeals process that could put everything on hold. And of course, there's an election in November, as we all know.
As we all know, I'm going to ask you the question because you've been at that courthouse for so long, Jeremy, that I feel like you probably know all the food trucks and their menus by heart. But I have to ask what it was like sitting in that courtroom and how specifically Donald Trump appeared to handle the news. I mean, every single thing I have read from every observer is that he was just stony-faced, he was angry, and you noted in your piece that Alvin Bragg was in the room, and he was also poker-faced.
So earlier in the day, after the testimony was read back, and it wasn't good testimony for Donald Trump, he looked very glum as he walked out of the courtroom. He looked very glum, very upset, almost nervous, I thought. Then when we got back and we heard there was a verdict, he reverted to this sort of meditative, stone-faced, eyes closed version of himself that he's been throughout the entire trial. I'm describing what he was like immediately after the verdict, because during the reading of the verdict, they didn't show Trump's face on the cameras, which is our only real view onto his face. I think it was because they were showing pictures of the jury and they didn't want to broadcast that out, but we didn't have that instant. I did look at him at the moment that we were told that there was going to be a verdict, and he did look very glum. The mood generally was just so tense. It was so quiet in that courtroom. There was like a almost a giddy expectation among the press corps that something big was about to happen. Not that Donald Trump was about to be convicted, but that there was going to be a big major occurrence in the history of the United States, and we were going to be there for it. So there was that tension, and there was also that intense silence. As he was leaving the courtroom, I noticed he tried to grab his son, Eric, it looked like. He reached out for Eric Trump, who was the only adult child of Donald Trump in the courtroom on Thursday when the verdict was read. Donald Trump Jr. had been there in recent days, but he was not there on Thursday. That was a very strange moment. I hadn't seen anything like that in terms of movement and emotion towards a family member or an attorney or anything like that. After the verdict came down, his attorneys were kind of whispering to him. They knew it was bad news. They were whispering to him, and he was just kind of stone-faced, as I said. But the attorneys looked like they were pretty anxious about the whole thing. And then we all kind of got kicked out. And after 6 weeks, they were just like, bye-bye, and sent us all on our way into the merry streets. As I was leaving the courthouse and walking down the street, I talked to a former judge, Vincent Grasso, who told me, what he really felt. And I think this was for a certain element of the press corps as well, what was felt. This was just an incredible vindication of the American jury system. The notion that we are all judged equally by 12 of our peers in our community, 12 ordinary people. This was a great shining day for that in American history, I'll say. And there was a sense of that leaving the courtroom. There was also the random street jubilation of people screaming, obscenities and joy. And somebody said, we're dancing in the street, I heard on the way out, in terms of certain New Yorkers being kind of happy about this.
We are going to take a short break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
If I asked you, how many subscriptions do you have? Would you be able to list all of them and how much you're paying? Now, if you would have asked me this question before I started using Rocket Money, I would have said yes. But let me tell you, I would have been so wrong. I can't believe how many I had. Like those annual subscriptions you forget about until they charge your credit card. I was wasting a ton of money on those. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control now over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. And if I see something I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with just a few taps. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped them save a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. Stop doing it. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/podcast. That's rocketmoney.com/podcast. rocketmoney.com/podcast.
I'm Dahlia Lithwick. Let's get back to my conversation with Jeremy Stahl, who is Slate's jurisprudence editor and Law of Trump, trademark, correspondent. Jeremy, one of the things I think you've been saying in conversation with me over the last little while is that there's just something, you've mentioned the jury system, but there's something about a trial court judge, right? Juan Merchan is not auditioning for SCOTUS. He's not trying to do anything other than, protect his jury, protect his witnesses. He's certainly more in the lane of law than politics most days. In some sense, there's something sort of small and delightful in much the same way that you just said about a jury of 12 people, about a judge who just conducted this case as though he were just a judge's judge trying to oversee a trial. And even though the defendant kept trying to turn it into something circus-like, it seems like there's some utility in the end, some vindication about going small with a judge who's just a seasoned judge who's just trying to run the thing like a trial.
I heard the judge described by sources very familiar with this courthouse and all of the players here as workmanlike. And I think that was meant as like a knock and a compliment at the same time, because he performed exceptionally at the things that you were just talking about, Dahlia, protecting his courtroom, protecting his jurors, making sure that the trial was run efficiently, orderly, quickly, being decisive, not languishing, for ages on each individual decision, but making decisions. And for all of Trump's, cries of corruption and political hack and all these things, he did make efforts to be even-handed. He did try to give both sides a little bit. At the same time, there were some mistakes made, during jury selection, and I was guilty of this, but he did not instruct the press until it was too late to not publicize elements of the courtroom that were public about individual details of the juror, right? That was a fault. That was not on the press. I don't think that was on him. Also, during Robert Costello's testimony, former Trump world attorney who is very close with Rudy Giuliani and who tried to be Michael Cohen's attorney, when he was on the stand last week, he was abusing the courtroom with his demeanor, with his behavior. He was basically contemptuous. He was sighing. He was talking over the judge. He was doing all these things. And the judge asked the jury very quietly and calmly to leave, and then confronted Costello on this. He continued to give him guff. And then the judge cleared the courtroom. I was in there for this. It was absolute madness that he would do something like this. Members of the press were all removed. We had a right to be there. This was a public courtroom. There was no reason to kick us out. And he did. I may be quibbling here, but he let like people like Kash Patel and Alan Dershowitz stay in the room, which is it's just not correct. These are little petty things that maybe I can say about the judge at the end of this, but overall, I think your point is very well taken that he performed as a judge's judge. He did his job. He did the work. He made sure the jury did the job and did the work, and he gave them everything they needed to do so. And that's why we have a verdict, and that's why we have this verdict, which was the right one.
Jeremy, I'm really struck by, what you said about hearing a former judge say walking out of the courtroom. Alvin Bragg, in his comments on Thursday evening, very brief comments, but was at pains to sort of really say at the end of the day, this was 12 ordinary Americans vindicating justice in a way that really flies in the face of all the systems that make us feel small and powerless, right? We've been talking about Sam Alito until I want to cry. And here you have 12 ordinary jurors, right? They're not heroes. They're not Robert Mueller. They're not Jamie Raskin. They're not running an impeachment. They're just people. And this is a kind of a glorious thing about the American jury system. And I guess I wanted to give you a beat to do the same thing that I think Bragg did when he started by thanking the jurors, as just sort of making the point that it is not on heroes to save us. This is on us to save us. And this feels like it's almost the element that has been missing in this legal conversation from the jump.
They took their jobs so seriously. And this is something that the judge thanked them for. He thanked the alternates as well, because even the alternates were just so attentive. So many jurors taking notes. So many jurors just during the jury instruction, they were dead focused on what the judge would. That thing's long. It's 55 pages, an hour of like this hard, convoluted, just mess of legal language. And they sat there and they were completely focused, eye to eye with the judge. They did the same thing with many of the witnesses. Even the jurors that I was a little bit like nervous about, towards the end were paying very, very close attention. They knew how serious this was. They treated it with the seriousness it deserved. And as you said, they're just 12 people. They're just 12 regular people. They're not, a superstar prosecution team or anything. They were just people charged with doing a job of rendering a decision about justice, a verdict about justice. And not that it makes me all weepy-eyed or anything like that, but it was powerful, and it was, in a way, it was beautiful. Not talking about the fact of the conviction itself, but just the fact of this is how it's supposed to work, and it actually worked for once the way it was supposed to work.
Time now for a short break.
Hey, Slate listeners, I'm Christina Cauterucci, the host of Slow Burn, Gays Against Briggs. I want to tell you about a special event we're doing at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City on June 13th. To celebrate the new season of Slow Burn and Pride Month, we'll be hosting an exclusive taping of the show with special guests including Eric Marcus, the host of Making Gay History. We'll dive deeper into this season and talk about the lasting impact of the Briggs Initiative and the continued fight over LGBTQ rights in schools. Plus, we'll share some behind-the-scenes stories and never-before-aired tape from this season. It'll be the perfect way to celebrate Pride Month this June, with LGBTQ stories and voices across generations. You won't want to miss it. Again, that's June 13th at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/slowburn. Hope to see you there. In 1978, gay people in California faced a dire threat.
Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative.
The teaching profession is riddled with the homosexual element.
John Briggs is going to fire every gay and lesbian school teacher in the state of California.
I'm Christina Cauterucci. This season on Slow Burn, we'll explore how a nationwide backlash against gays and lesbians led to a massive showdown in California.
This was tens of thousands of pissed off gay guys and lesbians roaring down Market Street.
With so much at stake, young people became activists.
We've got to fight back. We can't let this happen in California.
And activists became leaders.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you.
Slow Burn, Season 9, Gays Against Briggs. Out now, wherever you listen.
I'm hearing, echoes of Ian Basson, of Heather McGee, of Mark Elias, of Eric Holder, of so many people on this show who kept saying to us, justice is not about magic people in the sky. Justice is about ordinary Americans taking the machinery in their hands. And I love that that's where you landed too. I think I would be remiss, Jeremy, before I say goodnight and let you eat something that is not from a food truck. There was an immense amount of second guessing about this case, whether it was the right vehicle, whether it was the right crime, whether, Alvin Bragg was too far behind, whether he was too far ahead, whether this was not going to be the criminal case. And yet it turns out you only need one. And Donald Trump is a convicted felon tonight. Is the theory, in terms of the rule of law, that all of this Monday morning quarterbacking about Judge Chutkan and what's going on with Fani Willis, or has Eileen Cannon, even gone to law school? Like, all of that is maybe unnecessary, that at the end of the day, we've been saying on this show, like, the law is too slow, the law is too mincing, it is too meticulous, it is too fussy and needy. And at the end of the day, maybe it's just possible that the rule of law needs a little time and a little space, and some case can get the job done. Like, do you feel a little more confident on Thursday than you felt since 2016 that maybe it is in fact a nation of laws and not men?
I feel a little bit better about that nation of laws thing. Yes, that little thing. I do. That, I have to say, that feels better. I hear what you're saying about this not being the right case necessarily to have gone first. I heard a source say that Alvin Bragg didn't even want to go first. I don't know if that's true or not, but Rick Hasson, who was our brilliant friend and voting rights expert, who was very critical of this case throughout, said something which I think was smart, which is he cited Donald Rumsfeld's horrible a quote about the Iraq War saying you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And that's what this case was. Because of all the machinations and issues that have gone on with these other cases, this was the first one, even though it was seemingly the least significant. And I feel like comparing everything has been unnecessary the entire time. Donald Trump is a criminal. He committed a series of crimes. This is the first one that has been proven in a court of law. And it doesn't matter that it's not an insurrection that he was convicted of first. It doesn't matter that it wasn't the hoarding and stealing and doing God knows what with national security secrets and classified documents that went first. It doesn't matter that this was related to a hush money scheme, honestly. It was an effort to distort and corrupt our election, which he won in 2016. And the prosecutors made a convincing case that it may very well have worked. It may very well have worked. And that is quite serious, even if it doesn't rise to the level of those other offenses necessarily. And the fact is that this prosecutor, this judge, and this jury got the thing done. And they got it done in a timely fashion where others have not. And I do think I'm still concerned about the timing of all those cases. I'm still upset about the timing of all those cases. But I agree with you that one down ain't so bad.
Jeremy Stahl has been the editor of Slate's Jurisprudence forever. He has been wrangling all of our Law of Trump coverage for so very long, and then put on his reporter's hat and covered this spots off this case. Jeremy, I hope that you will cover the spots off future criminal trials, but I really hope you get a bunch of sleep before then. Thank you so much for being Slate's eyes and ears on this.
Oh, thank you, Dahlia. I will sleep very well tonight, I think.
And that is a wrap for this truly extraordinary episode of Amicus. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you so much for your letters and your questions and your thoughts. You can always keep in touch with us at amicus@slate.com, or you can find us at facebook.com/Amicus Podcast. Sarah Birmingham is Amicus's senior producer. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio at Slate. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor. And Ben Richmond is our senior director of operations. We will be back with another episode of Amicus on Saturday. Until then, hang on in there.
What impact do you want to have on the world? At General Dynamics Information Technology, GDIT, we put technology to work on some of the most complex missions in the intelligence community. Grow your career beyond your imagination with meaningful work that matters. At an award-winning top workplace, we are hiring clear technical and intelligence professionals. If you are driven by a vision of a better and more secure future, join us and apply now at gdit.com/careers.